The first time Drew Harper asked me to stay out of the rain, it felt like a kindness I couldn't quite trust. It was late afternoon at the beachside surf school, the sky still bright, even as the clouds turned their undersides, the color of wet asphalt. Caleb Mercer stood by the entry gate and tried not to look like he was waiting for something, anything, to happen. He told himself he was only waiting for the break in the weather. That was the only explanation that made sense. Drew arrived with a stack of towels tucked under one arm, like he'd planned for us to need them, like he'd known the storm would circle back around. The ocean behind him kept flexing, rolling higher, the surface flashing silver and then smudging into gray. His truck was parked crooked, because he always rushed when the wind changed, and because the two of us had grown used to reading the coast the way other people read a clock. "Hey," Drew said, like it was easy to say my name. "Hey," Caleb answered, but his voice came out flatter than he meant it. He swallowed. He had promised himself he wouldn't get weird. Not after last summer. Not after the way he'd watched too many people turn from strangers into headlines the moment they got loud about what they wanted. Drew's hands hovered near his gear, near his phone, near anything but Caleb's face. He had the kind of attentive energy that made people feel seen and safe. Caleb had always admired that. It was why he'd started working here in the first place. Why he'd traded the city for a season where everything had salt in it, where the only deadlines were tide charts. "Don't try to be tough," Drew said, nodding at the sky. "You'll catch a chill. You always do." Caleb forced a laugh, but it barely made it out. "I don't always catch chills. You do when you pretend you're fine," Drew replied. And for a second his eyes looked tired. Not like he was sick, like something else lived under his ribs and wouldn't stop moving. Caleb should just nodded, should gone inside, should let it be what Drew wanted it to be. A harmless exchange, a coworker caring about another coworker. But then Drew added softer, "Come on, let's get you dry." The words landed oddly heavy, not romantic, not yet. But something in the way he said them made Caleb feel like he was being guided away from a cliff edge. Before Caleb could answer, Ronan Pierce walked in from the storage shed, a surfboard balanced against his shoulder. Ronan had the relaxed authority of someone who'd been on this beach long enough to have seen people change their minds, come undone, rebuild themselves. He had a calm patience that made chaos feel less personal. "You two out here acting like the weather owes you an apology?" Ronan asked. He grinned, then his gaze shifted, landing on Caleb's damp hair. "You look like you got caught in a wave on purpose." Caleb opened his mouth to deflect, but Drew beat him to it. "He did it again," Drew said. "Thought he'd tough it out. He's not coming back out until he's dry." Ronan's eyebrows lifted. "Are you now the boss of drying towels?" Drew looked like he wanted to smile, but something stayed held back. "I'm just—" He stopped, like the sentence was a door he hadn't decided to walk through. Caleb felt the pause tighten the air. He could almost hear the unspoken part behind it. He'd always been good at reading people's silences. He'd learned that skill before he ever learned how to admit his own fear. "What are you doing tonight?" Drew asked. And Caleb realized he'd asked the question to avoid the silence. Not because he meant it literally. Caleb hesitated. I have to close the shop with you." "You're off tomorrow," Drew said. He sounded pleased, like he'd uncovered a hidden coupon. "We can swap. You close today, I'll close tomorrow." Caleb's brain started listing practical reasons to be suspicious. Drew was usually strict about schedules. This wasn't how he operated. Drew was rarely extra with anyone. But Ronan laughed, stepping between them in a way that looked casual and felt protective. "Go on," Ronan told Caleb. "If the coach wants to bully you into warmth, let him." Drew's jaw flexed, but he didn't contradict Ronan. Instead, he turned and gestured toward the small indoor lounge at the back of the surf. School, cozy, half beach shack and half shelter. The smell of sunscreen lingered in the air, mixed with detergent and wet neoprene. Caleb followed, because his body moved faster than his caution. In the lounge, Drew started laying towels out, like it was a ritual. He draped one over a chair, another over the counter, then picked up a hoodie and held it out. "Here," he said. Caleb's hands hovered in the air before he took it. He could feel the heat from Drew's palm through the fabric where the hoodie had been resting. "Thanks," Caleb managed. Drew's eyes flickered to Caleb's face, then away again. "You're welcome." There was no teasing, no flirt. Just something careful, like he was trying not to startle a wild animal. Caleb sat in the chair and pulled the hoodie over his head. It smelled like ocean air and something older. Wood polish, maybe, or the faint tobacco note he sometimes caught on his sleeves. Drew's gaze stayed respectful, but it kept brushing Caleb anyway, like a current you felt before you saw it. When Caleb looked up, Drew was staring at the wet strands still clinging to his forehead. Caleb reached to wipe at his hair and their hands nearly touched. Nearly. It was such a tiny miss, but it changed the temperature in the room. Caleb felt something in himself tilt. Not love. Not yet, but awareness. Like a wave shifting, choosing a eterican. Drew cleared his throat. Ronan said you've been helping the new hires. Yeah, Caleb said. I like showing them how to read the water. I know. Drew's voice softened. You do it like you're teaching someone how to breathe. Caleb's chest tightened. He wanted to ask what that meant, but he didn't want to give Drew a chance to retreat. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but inside the lounge the sound felt muffled. Caleb listened anyway, letting it fill the gaps in their conversation. Then, in the middle of the ordinary moment, Drew's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face changed. The tiredness returned, stronger this time. He didn't pick up the call immediately. He stared at the screen like it was a decision. Caleb watched him the way he watched tide lines, waiting for the shift. Finally, Drew answered, Hey, I can't talk right now. Caleb couldn't hear the other voice clearly, but he didn't need to. Drew's expression already told the story. Tense, constrained, bracing himself. Drew lowered his voice. No, I said I couldn't. You're putting me in a corner. Caleb's throat went dry. Drew looked up at Caleb while still holding the phone, as if he were checking whether Caleb would understand. Caleb wanted to pretend he hadn't noticed, but his eyes betrayed him. Drew ended the call quickly, too quickly, like he was trying to snuff out a fire before it could catch the room. He slipped the phone into his pocket. His shoulders stayed lifted, rigid. Everything okay? Caleb asked. Careful. Drew's laugh was short and sounded like it belonged to someone else. Yeah, it's just work stuff. Caleb didn't believe him, not fully, but he also didn't know how to press without making Drew feel cornered. Caleb had spent most of his life being cornered by other people's expectations, their assumptions, their hunger for a neat story. He didn't want to be another expectation. Ronan walked back in, shaking rain off his hair. You two coming out? The last class is waiting. The weather's moving. Drew nodded. He reached for Caleb's damp jacket, then stopped. Stay here, Drew said. Caleb blinked. What? Just stay. Drew's tone was firm but not harsh. It was protection. Caleb hated how much he wanted it. Caleb sat still, hands gripping the hoodie sleeve. His mind spun, catching on details. The phone call, the tightness in Drew's eyes, the way Drew had asked him to be dry like it was a ritual before something bigger. Ronan led the way back outside. Caleb watched from the lounge window as Drew and Ronan moved toward the beach. Drew turned once, caught Caleb watching, and for a second his expression softened. It looked like regret, and something that might have been gratitude. Then he disappeared into the rain-silver air. Caleb felt a bruise forming in his chest. Not pain exactly, more like a warning. Later that evening, the ocean finally settled into a calmer rhythm. The class ended, boards returned, wet gear stacked. Ronan began locking up, calling out reminders about towels and keys. Drew stayed behind, helping Caleb clean up even after Ronan left. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden confession. No fireworks. It was just the two of them, the dim amber lights in the surf school, the sound of the tide pressing against the shore like it had nowhere else to go. Caleb wiped down a table, hands moving slowly. He could feel Drew's presence behind him, not hovering, not intruding, just close enough to change every breath. You're quiet, Drew said. Caleb swallowed. I'm tired. Drew's chuckle sounded warm, but the warmth didn't last. No, you're thinking. Caleb stared at the cloth in his hands. The fabric caught a trace of sand and scrubbed it away like it was trying to clean more than one thing. I saw your phone, Caleb said, and his voice surprised him with how honest it sounded. Drew didn't flinch. He just went still. Caleb hated himself for the moment, not because he'd told the truth, because he could feel Drew's reaction building under the surface. Caleb had a talent for finding pressure points. What did you hear? Drew asked carefully. Not what they said, Caleb admitted. But I saw your face. Drew exhaled slowly. He rubbed a hand over his mouth like he was wiping away words. It's not your business, I know. Caleb kept wiping, as if he needed something to do with his hands. But you've been different today. You've been taking care of me. Drew turned then, fully facing him. In the amber light, his eyes looked greener, almost luminous. Caleb felt suddenly exposed, like he'd stepped into sunlight without realizing. Drew's voice dropped. I didn't ask for you to notice. Caleb looked up and their eyes locked. For a moment, Caleb thought he saw something in Drew's face that didn't belong in a workplace. Something raw and frightened. "I'm not asking you to tell me everything," Caleb said. I want to understand where you keep disappearing to." Drew's jaw tightened. "It's not disappearing. It feels like it." Silence pulled between them. Then Drew said, "Caleb." Hearing my name from someone who normally didn't use it like that, soft, private, hit Caleb like a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not." Drew started, then stopped. He shook his head like he could rearrange his own thoughts into something safer. "I'm straight." Caleb blinked, the words landing wrong, like someone had spoken a language Caleb knew but hadn't expected in this room. Drew's eyes stayed on him. "I don't do this." Caleb felt his pulse in his throat. "Do what?" Drew swallowed. "Make people think I want something I don't." Caleb's mouth went dry. He didn't know how to respond without sounding like he was demanding proof. He wasn't demanding proof. He was just suddenly aware that there were categories he'd been treating as permanent, like weather patterns. Straight, gay, labels that people wore like armor. "What do you think I'm thinking?" Caleb asked, carefully. Drew's shoulders rose and fell once. He closed his eyes briefly. "That I'm about to cross a line." Caleb waited. The wait itself felt like an act of courage. When Drew opened his eyes again, there was a flicker of shame in them. Not cruelty, not manipulation, just fear. "I'm trying not to," Drew said. Caleb's heart sank a little, then steadied. Because if Drew was afraid, it meant Drew knew the danger of what he was feeling. It meant the feeling was real. Caleb didn't want to ruin Drew's life. He didn't want to be an accusation. But he also couldn't unknow what he'd started to sense. Caleb took a breath. The surf school smelled like salt and detergent, like the kind of honesty you can only find when there's no option to pretend the ocean won't wash away your lies. "I'm not thinking you're about to cross a line," Caleb said slowly. "I'm thinking you already did, and you're terrified of it." Drew stared at him. His eyes glistened, only a little, like tears trying to decide whether they were allowed. "No," Drew said, voice rough. "I didn't." Caleb shook his head once. "You asked me to stay dry. You told me your plans. You stayed behind. You could gone home." Drew's face tightened, the way it had during that phone call. "Because I wanted to," Drew admitted too fast, "and because Ronan would have noticed if I didn't." Caleb's mind snagged on that. Ronan would have noticed, meaning Drew didn't trust himself when he was alone. Caleb lowered the cloth. "You have a secret," he said. Drew flinched at the word. Caleb nodded gently. "Not the kind that's about being gay or straight. Something else. Something that would destroy what's growing between us." Drew's throat bobbed. He looked like he might deny it again, but this time denial didn't fit. Instead, Drew stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Not yet. Close enough that Caleb could smell him now. Salt sunscreen, the faint wood polish, and something nervous underneath. "I can't ruin you," Drew whispered. Caleb felt his own fear rise, but it wasn't the fear of losing Drew. It was the fear of becoming a lesson someone else used to stay afraid. "You're not ruining me," Caleb said. "You're making me feel seen." Drew's eyes closed like the sentence hurt. When he opened them, his gaze was steady. He was fighting himself. Caleb could tell. "I need you to hear me," Drew said. "And I need you to promise not to hate me for being honest." Caleb's heart thudded. "Okay." Drew's voice turned careful. "I've been with men before. Not in the way people will assume. Not in the way the world likes to turn it into a headline. I didn't wake up one day and decide." Caleb's breath caught. He didn't interrupt. He didn't demand more. He just listened. Drew took a breath. "There's someone I thought was safe because it was familiar, and I promised myself I could handle it." Caleb's mind tried to fill in blanks and stumbled. "A partner?" "A person I can't shake," Drew said, and the words sounded like they came from deep, stubborn roots. He's not violent, not like that, but he's legal. Complicated. There's paperwork. There's history." Caleb frowned, trying to understand without making it worse. Drew continued, slowly, like he was moving furniture in the dark. "He doesn't know about me. Not the whole truth, and I don't know how to tell him without burning my life down." Caleb swallowed. The secret wasn't just romantic. It was legal, emotional, maybe even dangerous in ways Caleb couldn't predict. "And you're scared because what you feel here." Caleb began. Drew nodded once. "If I let it grow, it will find a way to become public anyway." Caleb's chest tightened. "So you're keeping distance to protect both of us." Drew's mouth pulled, not quite a smile. "I'm keeping distance because I don't know who I am if I stop pretending." Caleb felt a quiet ache. Not anger, not blame, just the raw truth of being human and wanting someone even when you're built out of fear. Drew leaned in a fraction. I asked you to stay dry because I wanted to take care of you. Caleb's voice came out small. Why? Drew opened his mouth, then closed it. When he finally spoke, it was like the words had been waiting behind his teeth all day. Because you make me want to be better than my habits. Caleb's throat burned. He wanted to reach for Drew then. He wanted to say he understood. He wanted to promise that secrets didn't have to destroy love. But courage wasn't only wanting. Courage was choosing the slow, tender path instead of rushing into heat and pretending heat was the same as healings. Caleb took a careful breath. I don't want you to pretend with me, he said. Drew's eyes widened slightly. Caleb continued, steadying his voice. I'm not asking you to choose right now. I'm asking you to stop lying about what you feel when you're alone with me. Drew's hand lifted, hovered near Caleb's cheek, then hesitated. Caleb could feel the tremor in Drew's fingers. He didn't touch yet. He asked without words. Caleb nodded once. Drew placed his palm against Caleb's cheek, thumb brushing softly along the edge of his jaw. The touch was careful. Like Drew had learned, touch could be a weapon, could be a promise, could be both. Caleb leaned into it, barely. Then Drew's lips parted as if he might speak again. Instead, he pulled Caleb closer by the hoodie strings. The kiss was not sudden. It arrived like a wave that had been building all afternoon. Their mouths met gently, tentative, like they were testing whether the world would let them exist for one more second. Caleb felt tears threatening. Not because it was painful, but because it was exactly the kind of tenderness he'd stopped believing could happen to him without punishment. Drew drew back just enough to breathe. His forehead rested against Caleb's. I'm sorry, Drew whispered. For what? Caleb asked, voice breaking. For wanting you. Caleb closed his eyes. You don't have to apologize for that. Drew's breath shook. I still might ruin you. Caleb opened his eyes. He stared at Drew's face, memorizing every micro-expression. The fear, the restraint, the aching desire to be good. We can be ruined, Caleb said softly. Or we can be honest. I'd rather risk honesty than live in pretending. Drew's throat worked. He held Caleb's face again, this time with more certainty. You don't know what my secret can do. I know what fear does, Caleb replied. It eats everything slow. Drew's lips pressed against Caleb's again, longer this time, but still gentle. It wasn't about escape. It was about choosing to stay even when the heart was shaking. When they finally separated, it was the kind of separation that didn't feel like a break. It felt like a vow, quiet, unfinished. Later, Ronan returned to lock up the last gate. When he saw them standing close, his eyes narrowed with the affectionate suspicion of someone who'd probably guessed the truth hours ago. Drew, Ronan said, casual but knowing. You still got that closet full of excuses. Drew looked like he was bracing again. Caleb held his breath. Ronan's voice softened, just a fraction. You don't have to be afraid of me. Just be brave with Caleb, okay? Caleb looked at Ronan, startled. Ronan's gaze flicked away, as if he hated being the one to say it, then returned to Caleb with a quiet steadiness. You deserve patience, Ronan told him. And you deserve someone who doesn't run the minute love starts asking questions. Drew stared at Ronan for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether gratitude would save him or hurt him. I'll talk, Drew said finally. Ronan nodded once. Good, because later has a way of becoming never. Ronan left them alone again. But the air didn't feel lonely now. It felt charged. Caleb's hoodie felt too warm on his shoulders. Drew's hands still hovered near his face, as if they were trying to decide what kind of permission they'd been given. Do you want to come out with me for a walk? Drew asked. Caleb didn't hesitate. Yes. They stepped outside into the night. The beach was darker than it looked through the windows, wet sand shining like spilled ink. The moon reflected in the water, a thin path leading nowhere. Drew walked slower than usual. Caleb matched his pace without thinking. They passed the surf racks, then the small sign out front that still had faded summer dates from last month. The wind pushed salt into their hair. Caleb watched Drew's hands, watched his shoulders. Drew looked like he was carrying something heavy inside himself, even as he held Caleb close enough to feel safe. You think I'm straight, Drew said suddenly. Caleb glanced at him. You told me you are. Drew exhaled. I think I said it the way people say I'm fine. Like if I say the right word, reality will listen. Caleb's heart clenched. Is that what you're doing with me? Drew stopped at the edge of the water and faced him fully. The waves rolled in, then retreated, like they couldn't decide whether to touch land. I don't know how to let you in without making you a casualty, Drew said. Caleb's throat burned again. Then let me in carefully. Drew's eyes searched Caleb's face as if he was trying to find a rule book. Careful doesn't exist, he murmured. It does, Caleb insisted. It exists when you choose truth over speed. Drew's expression softened. Truth is slow for me. Caleb nodded. Mine too. They stood in the surflight, not touching, but close enough that Caleb could feel the heat rising from Drew's skin. Drew finally reached out again, this time not stopping at Caleb's cheek. He took Caleb's hand. Their fingers slid together like they'd practiced it in dreams. Caleb felt something loosen inside him, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to breathe. Drew squeezed his hand once. Tomorrow, Drew said, I'll tell Ronan everything I'm allowed to, and I'll start figuring out how to tell the rest of my life that I can't keep lying. Caleb's eyes stung. That's a lot. I know. Drew's voice broke on the edge of the word. But I don't want to be someone who uses affection as a hiding place. Caleb swallowed. Then don't hide. Drew leaned forward until his forehead touched Caleb's again. If I do this right, he whispered. Will you still want me when it stops feeling like a secret? Caleb's mind raced. He wanted to say yes without conditions. He wanted to protect Drew from having to carry another person's expectations. Instead, he chose something honest. I want you, Caleb said, but I'm not pretending it won't hurt. Drew's eyes closed. I can handle hurt. I'm not talking about your hurt, Caleb added, voice trembling. I'm talking about mine. I've built my life out of being careful. If I let you in, I'll have to learn how to be brave in public. Drew opened his eyes. I'll learn too. The ocean surged, then calmed, and in that in-between, Caleb felt the beginning of something bigger than desire, something like partnership, not a miracle, not a cure, a decision. 2 days later, summer classes kept moving. Because the world doesn't stop for romantic timing, Drew showed up early and taught the beginner group with his usual steady hands. Caleb watched him from the shoreline, feeling both pride and fear. There were moments when Drew's eyes met his, and Drew would look away, like he was still afraid of the feeling itself. Other moments, Drew moved closer when he adjusted Caleb's stance on the board, and his touch lasted one breath longer than it needed to. Caleb pretended not to notice. He failed. In the staff room, Ronan found them alone between lessons. The overhead fan whirred. The air smelled like sunscreen and coffee that had gone cold. Talk, Ronan said simply. Drew froze, then nodded. His hands fisted briefly at his sides and then relaxed. Not here, Ronan's expression turned serious. Where then? Drew looked at Caleb, and Caleb saw it. The moment Drew decided whether Caleb would be included in the truth. Outside, Drew said quietly. They stepped onto the boardwalk behind the surf school. The ocean roared faintly beyond the dunes. There was still summer brightness in the sky, but clouds were gathering at the edges like a warning. Ronan leaned against the railing. You said you'd talk. Drew nodded. I will. Ronan's gaze flicked to Caleb. And he'll hear it? Caleb's stomach rolled. He wanted to be ready. He wasn't. But he'd already chosen honesty in the dark of the lounge. He couldn't go back to pretending. Caleb lifted his chin. I'm here. Drew looked at him for a long time. Then he spoke. The secret isn't that I've wanted men, Drew began. It's that I'm not free. Ronan's face tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Drew kept going. There's a man I've been tied to through promises I made when I was younger and desperate. I told him I could be what he needed. I told myself I could handle it forever. Caleb's mind flashed with all the ways Drew had sometimes looked like he was listening to an invisible call, bracing for pressure. And now, Ronan asked. Drew swallowed. Now I can't, because what I want is here, and I didn't expect it. Ronan exhaled slowly. So your secret is that you've been keeping 2 lives in a bottle and you're afraid it'll shatter. Drew nodded once. Exactly. Caleb felt tears gathering, not because he was disgusted, but because the honesty hurt. The truth didn't make Drew less lovable. It made him more human. I need time, Drew said. I can't blow up my whole life overnight, but I can stop feeding the lie that I'm okay. Ronan's voice softened. I believe you. Drew's eyes widened. You do? Ronan nodded. I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's watching. Caleb's face burned. Drew looked away, shame and relief mixing on his features. Ronan continued. You don't get to demand patience from Caleb without earning it. Drew's shoulders slumped as if he'd been waiting for punishment. I know. Caleb's voice came out quiet. I'm not asking him to be perfect. I'm asking him to be real. Ronan nodded again, approving. Then, in the distance, a group of beginners laughed too loudly, and the moment loosened. The beach demanded their attention, but the truth had already seeped into everything. Over the next weeks, Drew's care became less like a secret and more like a practice. Caleb felt it in how Drew corrected his foot placement on a board, in how Drew waited for him after lessons, even when it wasn't efficient, in how Drew would touch Caleb's wrist for a second longer than required, and then apologize with his eyes. Caleb learned to read the apology without it turning into shame. Sometimes Drew would go quiet after midnight texts from someone Caleb couldn't see. Drew would stare at the screen and not move for a minute, as if the phone held a voice that could still control him. On those nights, Caleb would sit on the floor in the corner of Drew's apartment. Because Drew had invited him there, slowly, like he was building trust plank by plank. The apartment smelled like detergent and citrus cleaner. A surf poster hung on the wall with faded colors. Caleb didn't ask what the messages were. He only asked, "Are you safe?" Drew would say yes, but his voice would sound like he was trying to convince himself. Then Caleb would place a hand on Drew's knee and remind him with warmth instead of interrogation. One night, after a particularly tense exchange, Drew finally spoke without prompting. "I told him I'm confused," Drew said, staring at the sink where a glass sat untouched. "I told him I don't know what I want anymore." Caleb frowned. "And what did he say?" Drew's laugh was empty. "He said I don't get to change my mind." Caleb's stomach twisted. Drew turned. In the dim lamplight, his eyes looked almost black. I know. That's what I'm afraid of." Caleb stood slowly and walked to him. "He didn't touch yet." "Tell me the truth," Caleb said. Drew swallowed. "The truth is I want you. The truth is I've been using my schedule, my work, and my straight identity as a fence. But fences don't stop feelings. They only stop us from choosing." Caleb felt a tremor in his own chest. "Do you want to choose?" Caleb asked. Drew's lips parted. He looked like he might cry, and that made Caleb's own eyes sting because it wasn't just desire. It was grief for time wasted. "I want to," Drew said, "but I don't know how to do it without hurting someone." Caleb shook his head. "You're already hurting him by staying. You're already hurting yourself by pretending." Drew's expression tightened. "Then what do I do?" Caleb inhaled slowly. "You do the thing you've been avoiding." Drew stared. "What thing?" Caleb could barely get the words out. They felt like opening a wound to let air in. "You stop deciding for both of us," Caleb said. "You tell me what you're able to tell me, and you let me decide whether I can handle it." Drew's eyes softened. "You won't run?" Caleb laughed once, bitter and tender at the same time. "Maybe I will. I might not be brave forever, but I want to be brave with you, not brave against you." Drew stepped forward. This time he touched Caleb immediately, his hands on Caleb's shoulders, thumbs near his collarbones, as if he was making sure Caleb was real. "I'm scared," Drew admitted. Caleb's heart clenched. "Me too." They held each other for a long minute, neither of them asking the other to be a different person. Then Drew kissed Caleb again, gentler than before, as if the kiss was a promise to go slower with more sincerity. The day the secret threatened to become something public, it happened in the smallest possible way. Drew didn't arrive early to the surf school. Caleb waited by the registration desk with his staff shirt damp from the humidity. He told himself Drew might be delayed. He told himself not to panic. At first, panic felt like imagination. Then Caleb saw the familiar car pull into the lot. The driver got out, someone Caleb had never seen before, but he recognized the posture immediately. Not Drew's posture, not Ronan's. This one belonged to a person used to getting what he asked for. Caleb's stomach dropped. He watched as the man walked toward the front entrance, scanning the beach like he expected it to answer him. Ronan appeared beside Caleb. "Don't go near him," Ronan murmured. Caleb's hands curled into fists. "Is that?" Ronan didn't answer directly. His silence did. The man stepped inside the surf school and called Drew's name. His voice carried too easily, like he owned the air. Caleb stepped forward before he could stop himself. Ronan grabbed his elbow. "Caleb," Ronan warned. Caleb met Ronan's eyes. "I can't just stand here." Ronan's grip tightened. "You can't rescue him either." Caleb swallowed. He wanted to obey. He also wanted to protect Drew. He didn't know what protection looked like when the threat was emotional. Drew finally came out from the changing area, hair damp, face pale. The man stood too close to the desk, holding his phone like a weapon. When Drew saw Caleb, he flinched. That flinch was the truth. Caleb felt the room spin just slightly. Drew spoke first, voice strained. "We talked." The man smiled, slow and certain. "You said you'd handle it." Drew's throat bobbed. "I didn't say when." The man's eyes slid to Caleb, appraising. "So this is the new thing." Caleb's skin went cold. Ronan moved closer, his body blocking Caleb a fraction without looking like he was blocking him. Drew's face tightened. "Don't talk about him like that." The man laughed softly. "Like what? Like he's real? Like he's a person with a price?" Caleb's breathing grew shallow. He hated the way his body reacted, like fear had its own schedule. Drew stepped in front of Caleb instinctively. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was something older, survival. The man looked pleased. "You're still learning," he said. "You can't just walk away from what you promised." Drew's voice sharpened. "I can. I am." The man tilted his head. "Are you?" Drew's hands shook. "Just slightly." Caleb realized something. Drew had been asking Caleb for patience, but Drew was the one who needed courage in public. And Caleb needed to decide whether his love was only safe when it stayed private. He stepped forward gently, just enough to stand beside Drew's shoulder. The man's eyes narrowed. Ronan's hand lifted as if he might stop Caleb, but Ronan didn't pull him back. Drew looked at Caleb like he was grateful and terrified. Oh, Caleb forced his voice steady. "I'm a person," Caleb said. The man laughed again, dismissive. "So am I, and you don't want my problem." Caleb's heart hammered. His secret fear rose, that Drew's life would become dangerous for him. But Caleb also knew something else now. Drew's fear didn't mean Caleb wasn't allowed to stand next to him. Caleb swallowed. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to tell Drew he doesn't get to hide behind labels." Drew stared at Caleb. The man's expression darkened. "Oh." He glanced at Drew. "So he knows." Drew's face turned red with shame and anger. "He knows I'm not who you want me to be." The man stepped closer, voice lowering. "You think this is love? You think it fixes everything?" Caleb's stomach twisted, because the words were trying to twist his heart too. Drew's voice cut through it. "It doesn't fix everything. It just makes me honest. That's all I'm allowed." The man's eyes flicked to Ronan, then back to Drew. "You're going to do this in front of your friend?" Ronan's voice stayed calm. "This is a workplace," the man scoffed. "Workplace rules don't apply to people like me." Ronan looked at Drew. "Is he here about business?" The man's grin returned, but it was sharper now. "We're sorting out what happens next." Drew's face tightened. "Next is not now." The man leaned back against the desk like the desk belonged to him. "Then tell your employee to stop pretending he's not invested." Caleb stared at the man and felt a strange, calm take root. Maybe it was Drew's protective closeness. Maybe it was Ronan's steady presence. Maybe it was the ocean roar reminding Caleb that he couldn't control the waves, only how he held his body ends against them. Caleb looked at Drew. Drew's eyes pleaded, not for Caleb to step away, but for Caleb to be patient. Caleb understood. Drew wasn't asking for hiding. Drew was asking for time. Caleb turned back to the man. "I am invested," Caleb said, "but you won't get to make me smaller." The man's smile faltered. Drew stepped closer to Caleb and took his hand, right there in the surf school, in the middle of the summer day. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a simple hold, fingers interlaced like a quiet vow. Drew's voice lowered, aimed only at Caleb. "I'm not done. I'm just starting." Caleb felt tears burn again. The man looked between them, fury and calculation mixing. "We're not finished," he warned. Drew nodded once, jaw set. "We are finished when I say we are." The man left without slamming the door, which somehow made it worse. The exit felt like a threat saved for later. As soon as he was gone, Drew's knees loosened. He leaned against the wall like his bones had been replaced by jelly. Caleb stepped toward him and wrapped his arms around Drew carefully, like Drew might break. Drew exhaled into Caleb's shoulder, breath shaking. Ronan stood nearby, not interfering, just offering a calm presence. "Talk to me," Caleb murmured. Drew's voice was hoarse. "I hate that he saw you. I hate that you thought you had to handle this alone," Caleb replied. Drew pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were wet now, full of apology. I should've told you earlier," Drew whispered. Caleb shook his head. "You did tell me. Just not when you were ready. But you did tell me." Drew swallowed hard. "I'm still scared." Caleb nodded. "Me too." They stayed like that until the sound of the next class arriving pulled the world back in. The rest of the week moved slower. Or maybe Caleb moved slower because his heart was heavier. Every time Drew got a phone notification, Caleb watched his face. Every time Drew flinched, Caleb remembered the first night in the lounge, when Drew had asked to keep him dry and tried to protect him from whatever came next. Caleb didn't want protection anymore. He wanted partnership. One late afternoon, the tide was strong, and the water turned darker, thick with seaweed. Caleb and Drew walked to the small pier where they could see the waves with more clarity. Ronan stayed behind, teaching a lesson, giving them space. Drew stopped at the railing and stared at the horizon. Caleb leaned on the pier next to him. The wood was warm from the sun but cooled quickly in the wind. Drew spoke quietly. "I sent the email today." Caleb's heart jumped. To him? Drew nodded. "To start the process. Paperwork. Formal things. It won't be immediate, but it's done." Caleb waited, letting the words land. Drew's voice tightened. "I was going to do it without telling you, like everything else." Caleb turned slightly. Why didn't you? Drew's mouth pressed into a line. Because I realized I don't want to steal your trust and then call it love. Caleb's eyes stung. That's the first honest thing you've said that doesn't sound like an apology. Drew huffed a laugh, shaky. I'm trying. Caleb looked at him. Is it scary? Drew nodded. It's the scariest thing I've done. Because I can't control the fallout. Caleb swallowed. You can't control the ocean either. Drew's gaze snapped to Caleb, and for a second it looked like he might cry again. Caleb continued, voice gentle. But you teach people to move with it. You never pretend the water won't hit. Drew's breathing slowed. I wish I could do that for myself. Caleb reached for Drew's hand and squeezed. Then let's do it together. Drew turned, studying Caleb's face like he was searching for a hidden requirement. Caleb didn't give him one. Instead, Caleb said, Tell me what you need from me. Drew's eyes softened. I need you to stay patient when I get pulled. And I need you to tell me when my fear starts making decisions for you. Caleb nodded. And I need you to let me be honest too. Drew's brow furrowed. Honest about what? Caleb inhaled. He felt the secret of his own fear behind his teeth. I'm not only in love, Caleb confessed. I'm also scared you'll choose your old life when the consequences get loud. Drew's face tightened. I don't want to. I know, Caleb said quickly, because he didn't want Drew to think he was accusing. I know you don't. But I need to say it out loud because if I don't, it will turn into bitterness later. Drew stared at him. Then Drew pressed his forehead against Caleb's again. The same tenderness from the night in the lounge, but now with more stability. I won't choose silence, Drew whispered. I won't choose the version of me that pretends nothing is happening. Caleb's chest loosened. The sky darkened as evening approached. The beach lights turned on in soft rows, glimmering along the path like a promise. That night, they didn't go back to the surf school. They walked instead to the small rental cottage Caleb sometimes used when the apartment got too quiet. Drew hesitated at the door. Caleb watched him struggle. He could tell Drew wanted to ask for permission to stay. The idea of being alone with Caleb seemed to stretch Drew's courage like salt on skin. Instead of waiting, Caleb took a step closer. Stay, Caleb said. Drew's eyes widened. You're sure? Caleb nodded. I'm not asking you to stop being scared. I'm asking you to stop making fear the boss. Drew swallowed hard. Then he stepped into the cottage, closing the door gently behind them. Inside, the air smelled like clean linens and old wood. Lamps cast soft honey light. The quiet felt thick like the pause between waves. Drew walked to the couch and sat carefully, like his body didn't know where to place itself. Caleb sat across from him. They held eye contact for a long time. No rush, no performance. Finally, Drew spoke. I keep thinking that if I'm honest enough, it will get easier. Caleb tilted his head. Does it? Drew shook his head. No. It just makes the hard part clear. Caleb's voice softened. Clarity is a kind of relief. Drew looked at him with something like gratitude. I want to tell you something, and I'm terrified you'll hate me. Caleb's heart tightened. Tell me. Drew inhaled. I used to think my attraction to men was a phase that would pass if I kept moving. I thought if I stayed busy enough, it would disappear. Caleb listened, still letting the truth unfold. Drew's voice cracked slightly, but it didn't pass. It just became quieter, safer. And then you showed up, and it got loud. Caleb's eyes stung. Drew looked away, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. And now that it's loud, I'm realizing I've been using straight as a shield. I can't keep hiding behind it. Not when I want you. Caleb felt a strange ache. Not rejection. Just the fact that Drew had to learn his own language in real time. Caleb leaned forward. You don't have to earn my love by labeling yourself perfectly. Drew looked back at him, startled. Caleb continued. You have to earn it by telling the truth and letting me see you trying, that's it. Drew's eyes filled, and he wiped at them quickly, embarrassed. I don't deserve you, Drew whispered. Caleb frowned softly. You don't deserve love like it's a prize you can win by suffering. You deserve it because you're a person, and because you're choosing not to run. Drew shallowed, then he reached out and took Caleb's hand. The touch felt like a sunrise, slow and undeniable. They kissed again, carefully. Not hungry, not frantic, tender. Like they were both learning how to be gentle with something that mattered. At some point, the night shifted. The cottage grew warmer as they shifted closer, knees touching, foreheads resting. Drew didn't say anything else about paperwork or threats or consequences. He didn't need to. He held Caleb like he was promising. I will keep coming back to honesty, even when honesty makes my life shake. In the early hours before the first hint of dawn, Drew spoke, voice quiet and honest. I think I might not be who people think I am. he said. Caleb smiled softly, even as his throat tightened. Good, Drew breathed out. And I think you might not be who you think you are either. Caleb's eyes fluttered closed. What do you mean? Drew kissed the corner of his mouth. I think you've survived fear for so long you forgot you can want. Caleb's breath hitched. He wanted to say something profound, something lyrical, but he only had something honest. I want you, Caleb whispered. Drew's body stilled, like the words traveled through him and landed somewhere safe. Then Drew pulled back enough to look Caleb in the eyes. Say it again, he asked. Caleb laughed softly through tears. I want you. Drew's eyes closed. That's the thing. I want you too. They stayed like that until the first pale strip of dawn crawled over the horizon. The beach outside would wake soon. Students returning, boards waiting, the ocean ready to test them again. But in the quiet, Drew didn't pretend anymore. He let Caleb see the truth. Messy, incomplete, but real. And Caleb, for the first time in a long time, let himself believe that love didn't require perfection. It required courage. When morning came, Drew made coffee and didn't flinch from the sound of his phone's buzzing. He didn't treat it like fate. He treated it like a step. Caleb watched him, hand wrapped around his own mug, feeling the ache turn into something steadier. The secret still existed. Consequences still threatened. But Drew had chosen honesty over distance. And Caleb had chosen love over hiding. On the way back to the surf school, Drew walked closer than he used to. When they passed the sign with faded summer dates, Drew touched Caleb's wrist and didn't let go right away. Ronan saw them and didn't tease. He only nodded once, like he was approving a decision. The day's lesson started. The ocean roared. The world continued. But between Drew and Caleb, there was now a new kind of tide. A tide that came in on purpose. And when it finally pulled at their lives, they moved with it together.